Good evening to our esteemed guest speaker, Vice Chancellor Professor Chakrabarti, teachers and students who have joined us today for the webinar on the topic Examining Public Participation as a Contributor to Good Governance, which revolves around the theme of Good Governance Day, which is celebrated on 25th December. The gleaming sunlit dusk is ablaze, for you bring with yourself the light. And as it dispels the void that surrounds, your knowledge offers a place where education abounds. It is to my great privilege to have been provided with this opportunity to introduce Professor Chakrabarti, a name synonymous with political science, a name known to everyone, and a name that needs absolutely no introduction. But just to give an idea about his enormous contributions, I would like to throw some light on his work, for he has been associated with teaching and research for more than 3 decades. He is currently the Vice Chancellor of Vishwa Bharati University, West Bengal, formerly a professor of political science at University of Delhi. Professor Chakrabarti, who obtained his PhD from the London School of Economics and Political Science, has been a prolific writer and has authored more than 40 books published by globally reputed publishers. He is an authority in public administration and is widely cited for his original contribution to Gandhi's social and political thought. His book on the ideas of Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. is also a widely appreciated text. He has taught in several prestigious educational institutions such as the London School of Economics, Indian Institute of Management Calcutta, Monash University Australia, National University of Singapore, and Hamburg University Germany. He was the first occupant of the Mahatma Gandhi Chair for Global Nonviolence at James Madison University, Virginia, USA. We are extremely thankful to Professor Chakrabarti to accept our invitation on a short notice and take out time for us despite his busy schedule, and that too on a Sunday evening. But before we start, I would like to brief the guidelines to the participants. The participants are requested to mute themselves to avoid any disturbances. The participants can write their questions in the chat box, which will be taken up later during the session. I would now like to invite our staff advisor, Dr. Rupinder Oberoi, to enlighten us with her kind words.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to the webinar organized by La Polity, Department of Political Science, Kirodimal College, on this very pertinent theme of examining the people's participation as a contributor to good governance. It's indeed a great privilege, pleasure, and honor to have among us this Sunday afternoon Professor Bidhu Chakrabarti, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Vishwa Bharati University, and also a very renowned, distinguished, and well-known authority internationally and nationally in the field of political science, public administration, Indian political thought, and public policy as our guest speaker. Our deepest gratitude to you, sir, for accepting our invitation and gracing the event. It is also personally an extremely, extremely happy and special moment for me as I was student of Professor Chakrabarti. He has been my teacher, my mentor, and also my PhD supervisor. And since now that I teach public administration and public policy in college, your books are, sir, constant reference and must read for the students who really want to comprehend the subject well. Our students are therefore really keen to meet you and listen to you. So truly obliged to have you with you amongst us, and also being so kind to spare the time from your very busy schedule. Professor Chakrabarti's work, scholarly work and published work is truly, truly breathtaking, as Yashasvi just mentioned. But just to recapitulate and underscore his scholarly diversity, I must mention that he has written and researched on diverse multiple topics like modern Indian political thought, Indian government and politics, social political thought of Mahatma Gandhi, public policy, public administration, coalition politics, corporate social responsibility, ethics and governance, politics, ideology, and nationalism. He's written on Jinnah, Savarkar, Ambedkar, Rabindranath Tagore. I think one of the most recent work is on the electoral dynamics of Indian politics, which was published in the year 2021. So incredible and spectacular body of work and huge inspiration for many like us. Well, coming to the topic of today's webinar, as we are all aware that it coincides with the Good Governance Week, starting from December 20th to December 26th, which was initiated with the goal of encouraging active engagement of citizens, redressing and disposing of public grievances, and improving the overall service delivery down to the last man. Good governance and citizen engagement or citizen participation has become a very relevant topic to understand, especially in the context of functional and substantive democracy, where we need an informed citizens, empowered media, widespread involvement in the articulation of the policy and agenda setting. Good governance by definition implies responsive state, a governing process that is open, that is transparent, that is accountable, inclusive to all, inclusive to rather all legitimate interests and stakeholders. It is also sort of well recognized that state alone cannot solve the various or numerous problems and offer remedies to the democratic deficits. So it requires citizens' action and interaction. So a meaningful democracy must strengthen civic voices, demonstrate responsive governance systems, promote the interest of all its citizens. The new governance paradigm is all about process, policies, partaking, partnership that is compelling and gripping the government agencies to enlarge and expand public consultations and develop new paradigms with civic society. It has to be bottom-up approach to make citizens intrinsic part of the governance. So I stop here, and without further ado, I invite and kindly request Professor Vidhu Chakravarty to share his understanding and views on the topic. We're keen to hearing for you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, and I must thank my young colleagues. First of all, the topic is interesting, but I'm a little confused because those who have read my stuff, read my book on governance, they probably have understood that I am a little old-fashioned in my thinking, in the sense that whenever I see the new words, I try to understand the epistemological conspiracy behind the coinage of these new words. So when I saw the topic, examining public participation as a contributor to good governance, I was struck, by the idea that which of the routes I'll take. Shall I take an easy route to explain the theme, or shall I take a little complex route to explain the theme? Easy route, is something which my academic mentor, she already spoke about, but I'd like to take up the difficult route, because easy route doesn't, make me very happy as an academician, as someone who is trying to get into the bottom of the problem. So I'm initially I was uncertain as to how I shall approach you. That's one. And secondly, I don't know whether the language in which I'm going to speak is English okay, or do you think Hindi will do? Is English okay, Dashashri?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So I guess that everybody will understand my Bengali English, Benglish. I know my Delhi University students really accepted me despite my Benglish. So I hope, given the fact that you're all part of Delhi University, I think I have got that right over you. So I'll speak in my way in my way, both in terms of the topic and also the language. But personally speaking, in fact, Rupendra knows about it, that I prefer to take a difficult path always. And she knows, she probably remembers that I scolded her many times, because whenever she opted for an easy route, I said, no, that will not do. You have to think this way. And I'm sure I'm very happy today that she's the one who has been able to educate you more or less in the fashion in which she was trained under my, I wouldn't say under my care, but I would say under the care of Delhi University. My mission, or if you think in terms of my ideological commitment, I don't belong to any party, but I believe in certain ideas which inspired me to undertake difficult things. And in order to explain that, I refer to one very famous poem written by Harivansh Rai Bachchan. Those who read Hindi poems or शेर शायरी जो करते हैं, I'm sure they will follow it. And मेरे हिसाब से ये हरिवंश राय बच्चन का जो पंक्तियां will help us to understand why we should always try to go beyond our ability. And if you do not exercise, undertake this kind of exercise, you will never reach the manzil. तो हरिवंश राय बच्चन यही कहते हैं, मंजिल मिले ये तो मुकद्दर का बात है, मंजिल मिले ये तो मुकद्दर का बात है, हम कोशिश ही ना करें ये तो गलत बात है, हम कोशिश ही ना करें ये तो गलत बात है। किसी ने बर्फ को पूछा क्यों आप इतना ठंड होते हैं, क्यों आप इतना ठंड होते हैं? बर्फ से अच्छा जवाब दिया, मेरा अतीत भी पानी, मेरा भविष्य भी पानी, फिर गर्मी किस बात में करूं, फिर गर्मी भी किस बात में करूं? This is my philosophy. If you think that though I'm a very insignificant academicians, globally speaking, and also in the world of public administration, but I think this is something which really is a source of inspiration for me, that you have to keep on trying, and there is no guarantee that you will succeed, but if you keep on trying, then I'm sure आप मंजिल में जरूर पहुंच जाओगे। तो यही मेरा मकसद है, इनफैक्ट यही मेरा मिशन है। And your teacher knows about me that I have undergone several stress, I have crossed several hurdles in my life, and then I reached this stage where I am now. So academically, that's my approach. So as a result, I didn't get many students, because students were a little scared of me, that ये जो टीचर है ये तो आसानी से काम कराएंगे नहीं, तो इसके साथ काम करना पड़ेगा. And your teacher probably will vouch for that. So I didn't have many students, because I rejected many simply because the moment I understand that he or she is not willing to work hard, PhD मिल जाएगा, PhD मिलना उतना difficult नहीं है, आजकल तो आसान होता है, PhD मार्केट में भी मिल जाता है. But to do a PhD in the sense of a true PhD, you have to really work hard. And I think those who are willing to become part of the academia, they should thank the Almighty, because academics is the only job, teaching is the only job where you get paid to study. I mean, in no other job you'll get paid to study, but teaching is the only job where you get paid to study. So unless and until you study, unless and until you just do justice to the job you are doing, I think it's little unfair. And ये हमें लगता है ये गलत बात है, मतलब मेरे हिसाब से ये crime hai, it's a sin. So anyway, that's my way of looking at things. But today's topic, the public participation and good governance, conceptually speaking, they do not go together. This is my first premise. Conceptually speaking, public participation and good governance, they do not, and if you read the Minnowbrook 3 report, then you will find that the Minnowbrook 3 report refers to this aspect tangential, but didn't elaborate. So I'm trying to focus on that particular aspect. So, the first premise is that the public participation and governance, they do not match. They are actually contradictory to each other. So that's my first premise. And the second premise, when you talk of public participation, you are automatically linked with another idea, democracy. So, I'm trying to build up a relationship between and governance. Now, when you think of democracy, what do I mean by it? Democracy to me has got three features. Democracy is the one which talks about deliberation. Democracy is one which talks about confrontation. Democracy is a process of building consensus. So deliberation, confrontation means debate, and consensus means arriving at a decision in which the views of those who contradict and the views of those who endorse, they come together. So this is actually the process how democracy is actualized. I'd like to go a little further beyond this, that to me, democracy is a pilgrimage across differences. Because unless and until you appreciate differences, you cannot really appreciate the idea of being democratic. Because if you look at the etymology of democracy, it's nothing but the rule of the demos, the people. So if you think of the people as a collectivity, regardless of difference of opinion, then you have to think in terms of bringing them together under a platform. So democracy is nothing but a platform for the demos to come together on certain issues. So that's one. The secondly, in order to support this kind of hypothesis, what we require is constant reinvention. Constant reinvention, and a reinvention is possible if there is no order. So disorder and constant reinvention, they are interlinked. And with this, I define democracy. Democracy is nothing but, so democracy, as I said, is essentially a kind of constitution-driven system of governance. When I use the term governance, I have in mind the idea of public administration. As I said, I'm very old-fashioned in my thinking. So I still believe that we don't need governance, because the moment we accept governance as a conceptual parameters, we're actually entrapped in a conspiracy. Now, governance is not an innocent construct. Those who have read my book, they know that, I argue it's not an innocent construct. It's actually a construct given by the World Bank, the IMF, the global capitalism. We'll come to that in a minute. So I prefer to use the term public administration. But I'll use interchangeably governance and public administration to mean public administration, because I strongly believe public administration. Why? Because when you talk of governance on the basis of the global intervention, you'll find it talks about a process and a structure. Governance is about a process and a structure. But governance doesn't talk about the goal. Now, if you talk of public administration is certainly about a process and the structure, but at the same time, the idea of public, it also talks about the goal. So, when you think of process, we think in terms of the bureaucratic processes, basically. And when you think of the structure, we think of the bureaucratic structure. But in governance, the structure and the process are not linked with the purpose or the goal. But in public administration, the structure and the process are linked with the goal, because it is about administration of the public. So from that angle, I still think that public administration is a better word, is a better expression to understand what we mean by today's governance. Okay, so this is the kind of conceptual kind of foundation on which I would like to build my argument. Now, when you think of public administration and governance, and and the point which I made at the outset, that it is nothing but a kind of conspiracy, conspiracy of the global capitalist elites to impose this idea of governance. I have very definite, intervention, very definite intervention by the World Bank and by the IMF. But this particular idea was devised by an academic thinker, was executive director of the IMF. His name is Harlan Cleveland. Harlan Cleveland was the person who was associated with World Bank, and he wrote a book in 1972 called The Future Executive, a guide for tomorrow's managers. The Future Executive, a guide for tomorrow's managers. Now, see the title of the book. He's talking about the executive, which is very much a constitutional word. But the moment, if you come to the subheading or the subtitle of the book, he talks about the managers. And when you think of the managers, the idea of management, which relates to optimization of resources and fulfillment of the goal. So with the optimization of resources, you achieve what the goal is about to be achieved. So Harlan Cleveland actually transformed public administration into a mechanism by linking it with the managerial intervention in public administration. So this is the starting point of the conspiracy, and that conspiracy received a kind of bigger attention in the World Bank report of 1989, From Crisis to Sustainable Growth. That's also a World Bank report, 1989. That particular report talks about governance. I'll come to that in a minute, the definition of governance by this particular document. And the second document, which is also critical, is World Development Report of 1992. Now, starting from Harlan Cleveland, 72, then 1989, then 92. To me, these three documents constitute the foundation of the conspiracy called governance. Now, why am I calling it a conspiracy? Because these three documents, if you read it, they are talking about process, structure, but without the goal. So, when you think of public administration, as I mentioned at the outset, public, the word public, etymologically means it's meant for the people at large. And your mentor, academic mentor, talks about citizens. That's also something which is now defined as customer, citizens as client. The moment you define citizens as customer or client, you are actually taking out the political role of the citizens. What do I mean by that? I think everywhere, politics is something which exists everywhere, because politics means nothing but a process of power distribution. And at home, in college, among the friends, wherever you go, there is politics, in the sense that our relationship is governed by some kind of power distribution. And there we are not a customer, there we are not a client. We actually bargain on the basis of the power, relative power, which we possess ourselves. So, the idea of citizen also, by taking politics out of citizenship, they are reducing citizens to mere clients or customers. So, in today's world, when you talk of citizens, it's not merely citizens who are allowed to agitate against the state, who are allowed to agitate against the state because the state is deviant from the ideological belief. But state is deviant simply because state cannot provide the services for which it is supposed to have been created. So citizens, are reduced to become a client, a customer. I mean, if there is a complaint, about the lack of electricity, so you become a customer. But if there is a complaint about the nature of the state, then you become a citizen, because as a citizen, you have the right to change the nature of the state. I mean, nowadays you'll find contrasting viewpoints about the state in Delhi, about the state in different states and different provinces of India. So with regard to the union government, there are many people who think that this particular state is ideologically deviant from the democracy which our nationalist, forefathers sought to found. But there are some people who are very happy with this kind of state simply because this particular state is talking about ideological beliefs of the so-called majority. Now, so here you are adding your value judgment that you think that the majority views remain unrepresented. So now this particular state is good simply because it is talking about the majority, not exactly at the cost of the minority, but not paying much attention to the minority. But those who are talking about the secular India of an Nehruvian state, they will say, well, this state is totally deviant, this state has become a majoritarian state, etc., etc. So the point I'm trying to make, the moment you question majoritarianism, your role as a citizen is highlighted. But the moment you ask for a service from the state, your role as citizen is reduced to become a customer or a client. So nowadays, the citizens are not citizens because our political role is not evident the way it was evident in the past. It is being simply directed to the role of service provider, right? So this is the problem which I've been confronting. Now, in 89 and 92 World Bank report, why they are so critical in understanding today's governance. Now, if you look at 89 report, I'm sure your teacher must have taught all these reports to you in detail because I asked her to read the reports in detail when she was working with me. Now, if you look at those two reports, the first report talks about 4 important dimensions. The first important dimension is public sector management. Public sector management. The second was accountability. The third was legal framework for development. And the fourth was information and transparency. Now, if you take all of them together, the first is public sector management. That means there is an implicit assumption that all over the world, according to World Bank, public sector is not being managed properly. Nowadays you must have seen there is a kind of rat race to privatize the public sector. The latest being Air India. Now they are also trying to privatize the railway. Now, because they are mismanaged and because they said, Air India is nothing but a white elephant. So government is spending so much of money. So now it needs to be privatized. So the moment it becomes privatized, the private actor will have a critical role, will have a dominant role to decide the price which they will charge for the service they provide. So then the role of citizen is reduced to a customer in the sense that if you cannot afford to pay X amount of rupee, you are debarred from flying. But so long as it was part of public sector, the citizen could have set what is called a limitation, a constraint on the price rise. Nowadays you must have seen the gas price rise, is being agitated all over the country. The rise of petrol, the price of petrol is being agitated all over the country. But the government doesn't seem to bother simply because it is privatized to a significant extent. So privatization means a reduction or lessening of the authority of citizens. So whether you will agree with it or not, that's a different question. But those who are governance wala will argue for privatization simply because if you privatize, the implicit assumption is that if you are privatized, it will be managed properly, one, and secondly, you will get the actual service in exchange of the price which you pay. So that means the moment you calculate your happiness in terms of the price you pay and the service you get, you no longer remain a citizen. You are reduced to become a customer, a client, right? So this is one. The second is accountability. Now, here is also an implicit assumption that in the past, public administration as a system of governance was, or comprises people who are not accountable. Now, I'm not, I'm not supporting, but I'm simply saying that this idea of accountability is actually directing us to a trouble area in administration, because administration is not a machine. Administration is about human beings. Now, human beings of the 19th century and human beings of the 20th century or human beings of the 21st century, there is a radical differences. I mean, nowadays, that. I mean, you are used to telephone, cell telephone. I'm very uncomfortable because I don't know, if I press one particular button, all the numbers disappear. Even today, when there is no internet connectivity, I have to ask my son, please fix it up. So, my mind setup is totally different from yours. So that way, when you think of accountability, you have to think in terms of degree of measure. It doesn't simply mean doing things in accordance with certain priorities. Accountability also means doing things in accordance with your commitment to the system. The moment it comes to the idea of commitment, you are ideologically governed. You're ideologically governed to serve a particular system. Now, in governance, but when you think of accountability, you are paid to do X. If you do X, it's fine. Now, that means your idea, your vision is being restricted to a particular objective, and you are not allowed to go out. In fact, that's why I'm again, as I said, I'm very old-fashioned. I'm very opposed to PowerPoint presentation. That's also a conspiracy. How? Because in PowerPoint presentation, you must have seen nowadays. I hate it. I hate it in the sense that you find most of the presenters, they write long sentences, long paragraphs, and most of the time I saw the speakers tend to read all those paragraphs. Now, if that is the purpose of a presentation, I think you better show the PowerPoint and you sit and have a cup of tea, because everybody can read English. So there is no point in discussing those points. That's number one. And number two, it's a serious conspiracy. Think about it. Now, once you do the PowerPoint, you do not go beyond the PowerPoint. Your thinking is confined to those points which are put in the slides. So you don't think, differently from what you have put. So your thinking is also being, disturbed, is also being constricted. But, in the classroom, for instance, I mean, nowadays, I know many teachers come with PowerPoint slides. Now, in the classroom, I remember that, the way I prepare myself before I go to classroom, sometimes it happens that I, taught in a way which was totally at variance with my preparation. So, you keep on thinking. So PowerPoint presentation to me is again a conspiracy, by the world capitalist class to not to think beyond a point. Your thinking is, is being channelized in a very narrow way. So, your creativity will be disturbed to a significant extent. So similarly, nowadays you must have seen it's little, I'm diverting because I'm telling you out of my own experience. I mean, everybody faces this situation at home, and you, especially the younger generations. I mean, nowadays we hardly interact with each other. If you travel by the metro in Delhi, previously I saw that the next person sitting next to you, you tend to talk, you tend to strike a kind of conversation with him or her. But nowadays, the moment you sit on the chair of the metro, you'll open up, bring out your mobile phone, and then you start doing things together, even at home. So, again, this is the role of the citizen, that the citizens, are being defined essentially as a customer. And as a result, you must have seen, it's just like the West, after 2-3 years, the telephone becomes inoperational because it doesn't have enough RAM, it doesn't have enough memory. So you keep on, changing the phone. So you keep on, what is called adding to the capital of the world capitalist class. And, once you use a telephone, you are taking many people's lives. How? Because the telephone battery made of lithium, that material is available only in South Sudan and Uganda. And you'll find that every day, if you look at the South Sudan or Uganda, where there are mountains of lithium, and for capturing those mountains of lithium, there are many warlords. And people get killed every day. More than 1,000 people get killed to capture those mountains of lithium. Lithium is the source of the battery for the mobile phone. So, when you use a phone, please think of those, persons who got killed because of they were working for the warlords to capture those mountain of lithium material. So, these are all, diversity. But anyway, let me come to the point. When you think of public administration, why I am referring to public administration again, because public administration as a conceptual, I would say conceptual outcome is based on certain philosophical principles, which are good for humanity. Now, what are those principles? The first principle is the principle of enlightenment. Now, if you look at the public administration and the history of public administration in India, if you start from Elton Mayo's the Local Self-Government Act of 1882 till 1935 Government of India Act, if you look at that history, you'll find that this constitutional development was governed by the principle of the philosophy of enlightenment. Now, what is enlightenment? Very briefly, when there are many, starting from John Locke till John Stuart Mill, they are all the doyens of the philosophy of enlightenment. If you look at enlightenment as a philosophical approach, it has got three components. The first is the British variety, the second is the French variety, and the third is the American variety. When you talk of British variety is dependent on three C's: concern, care, and compassion. Concern, care, and compassion. So this is actually, if you look at the literature, starting from John Locke till John Stuart Mill, via Jeremy Bentham, then Herbert Spencer, then John Stuart Mill's father, James Mill. If you look at the writings of all these thinkers, you'll find they insist on three C's: care, concern, and compassion. To this is added the French variety. If you look at primarily the writings of Voltaire and Rousseau, you must have read, all men are born free, but everywhere they are in chains. But the original French Revolution would not have taken place had they not questioned the French ideological foundation on which the French monarchy rested. So both Voltaire and Rousseau were belief of the French system of governance. And what does it mean? It means that they were skeptical. They didn't believe what they derived from the past. So they were skeptical of the model of governance or the model of public administration which existed then. So French Enlightenment added the idea of skepticism. And then comes American Enlightenment. The famous quote by Thomas Jefferson, that all men are born equal. And from that comes the idea of equality, liberty, and fraternity. So liberty, equality, and fraternity. So if you take all of them together, this is Enlightenment philosophy in a very nutshell. And when you think of public administration, if you look at the way public administration unfolded in British colonialism, you'll find that they were governed conceptually, not in practice, conceptually by these principles. As a result, you'll find that in 1882, when we thought of democracy being very restrictive, till 1937 election, when the voting rights was confined to the academic degree, educational degree. You have to be at least matriculate, or you have to pay a certain amount of tax. Only then you are entitled to get voting rights. So it was not universal adult suffrage. It was very restrictive kind of thing. But the basic point is that it's an attempt of unfolding the governance process over a period of time. So this is the fundamental principle on which the idea of public administration, as it came to India as a piggyback of colonialism, it has that ideological inspiration from the principle of enlightenment. But when you think of governance, governance is what? Governance is essentially an attempt to fit into certain formula. And this formula, is given by the World Bank. That if you want to have governance, what you require? Written rules and regulations, means constitution. You have to be governed by the constitution. And the constitution means what? Is nothing but elaboration of certain principles, elaboration of certain policies, which are dependent on the social, cultural, and political context in which this constitution evolves. I'll give you an example. Now think of Bangladesh constitution and think of Indian constitution. Now Bangladesh constitution, there is what is called national religion. It's not a secular constitution. But in India, we didn't talk about the religion, we talk about secularism. Now, why so? Simply because Bangladesh constitution emerged out of a struggle. In the first constitution was secular liberal, which was made by Mujib government in 1975. But in 1972, after Mujib's death, when General Ziaur Rahman became the leader, he tried to Islamize. He tried to, baptize Bangladeshis into Islam. As a result, you will find that it has become what is called an Islamic Republic of Bangladesh. But India is not a Hindu Republic of India, simply because of the social, cultural, and political perspective in which Indian constitution was made, which was different from that of Bangladesh. That's why. So constitution is what? Is certain specific rules and regulations which are made on the basis of the social, cultural, and political context. So constitution cannot be universalized. If you universalize a constitution, that World Bank or IMF makes this constitution for India or for Bangladesh or for Pakistan, it should be universalized. There should be a standardized constitution. But as I said, constitution emerges out of the context, out of a kind of, what is called dialectical interaction between the text, the constitution, and the context, social, cultural, and political circumstances. Now, if you accept governance, then you are actually ruling that out, that there shouldn't be a separate constitution for each country. On the contrary, there should be only one constitution. Because governance talks about rule-driven policy design made by the World Bank and IMF. They don't say it categorically, but by forcing the state to accept you, I will not give you loan. I will not give you any technical help. So if you accept by technical help, you have to accept all these things. And 89 governance report was prepared simply because the sub-Saharan African countries could not repay the loan which they took from IMF and the World Bank. So because you give the money, so you force them to accept your conditionalities. So, the role of capital is very significant insofar as conceptualizing the idea of governance. They should have continued with public administration, but they knew well that if we continue with public administration, the word public is a source of trouble. So the word public needs to be taken out. As a result, they evolved a new coinage called governance. That's why I keep saying the idea of governance is nothing but a conspiracy. Now, the moment you talk of governance, what you are talking? You are talking largely about the structure. The structure. Now, for instance, especially in democracy, we call it, the role of the vox populi. Vox populi is the voice of the people. It's a Latin word. Vox populi is the voice of the people. But, if you think of the democracy in today's context, do you think that our parliament has the voice of the vox populi? Because so long as first past the post system remains, it is very difficult to conceptualize Indian parliamentarians being representative of the people at large. If you get 30% of votes and the other candidates get less than you are winner. So you represent only 30%. I'll give you very general statistics. Rajiv Gandhi got maximum percentage of votes. What was that? 41%. So 41% of the Indians supported Congress, and he got maximum number of seats, more than 400 seats. But 59% of Indians did not support him, did not support his party. So how can you say that Rajiv Gandhi, despite having maximum number of parliamentarians in the Lok Sabha, represented India at large? Because he did not represent 59%. Either they didn't vote for him, or they voted for somebody else, or they did not, that time there was no nota, they would have given a nota. So, when you think of governance being democratic, you have to keep all these things in mind. Now, you may ask the question, what I'm saying is probably impractical, because in the representative system, it is not possible. So you have to think in terms of proportional representation. But there is also problem, because you think of America, Donald Trump question that Joe Biden had adopted all kind of means to enhance his victory, to ensure his victory. So I don't know how to which is the best system of election under these circumstances. But I'm just trying to understand the problem which is the product of the contemporary situation. Now, under these circumstances, is governance an appropriate mode of conceptualizing public administration? That's the main question I'm asking. In this kind of uncertain world, when we have got many questions, when these questions remain unanswered, is governance the most efficient mode of conceptualizing public administration? Now, if we go into this particular aspect, that is it true or not, then then probably we'll have certain answer. I'm not saying that I can give you conclusive answer, but I can give you certain thoughts to arrive at a conclusion according to your priority. Now, what does governance mean? Here, I'm just drawing your attention to certain features of governance, and then probably you can think whether it is appropriate or not, whether it is conspiratorial or not. First of all, governance is nothing but a practitioner's contribution to administration. It is practitioner's contribution in the sense that it is devised by the World Bank people. It is devised by those who control global capitalism, World Bank, IMF, America, and some of the European powers. So West. It is essentially a West-centric concept of conceptualizing public administration, which is given as a universal mode of conceptualizing governance. So, what they do? They do, if I use the metaphor, they provide one size fits in all formula. So there's only one size. But I'm questioning that this one size of public administration is contrary to public administration, where the requirement of public differs from one place to another. I mean, in India, probably the requirement of food is more important than the requirement of education. In the United States, the requirement of the immigrants are more important than the requirement of having meals a day. So if you think of many nations or states. So because it is practitioners' contribution, especially World Bank and the IMF, it has a tendency to provide one size fits in all formula, which to me is both undemocratic and inappropriate to the actual social, cultural, and political situation. That's one. The second, once you accept governance as a mode of conceptualizing public administration, what you are doing? You are actually trying to introduce the managerial dimension to public administration. Now, in IIMs, what is the main course they offer? They offer the main course focuses on how to manage the situation. They don't say how to govern. They don't say how to administer. They say how to manage. So the moment you talk of management, you are actually, dealing with the optimization of resources for the achievement of goal. So managerial dimension is being introduced in governance. Now, in public administration, there are many things the state has to do. There are many things the public administration has to do. Now, for instance, education, health, social security. These are important things which the government should do. But the fact that neither education, nor health, nor social security pays back the way government spends. So the moment you think in terms of managerial approach to governance, you stay away from your social duties to the people. So governance is that kind of concept, that kind of conceptual parameters, which takes away the social role of the state. The state withdraws. You must have seen that, education, the budgetary sanction for education is being depleted every year. And in its place, what is increasing? I'm talking about Indian budget, defense. Now, what I don't understand. Suppose if we defeat Pakistan, what will it mean? Do you think the 34% of our people, those who live below the poverty line, will get 2 meals a day? Will have a heavenly life in India? I don't think so. But every year, you must have, if you check the budget, the government of India is enhancing its defense budget at the cost of education budget. Only 4% of the total budget is for education, while defense is more than 30%. But unless and until the education is something which should be given by the state. And nowadays, if you are well off, you can send your kids to a good school. If you come from a well-off family, you can go to a private English school. But think of Kendriya Vidyalayas in Delhi. Nobody would like to go. Simply because the teachers, the infrastructure, the level of education are so poor, so bad, that the government, that we don't prefer to send our kids to those schools. So that means what? The government is withdrawing, from these activities. And the governance is that conceptualizing category, which is defending that. That, if you want to get service, you have to pay for it. I mean, you must have traveled by Indigo, I'm sure, or SpiceJet, or Airlines to pay for the chair. If you want a chair with leg space, more leg space, you have to pay more. If you want a chair next to the window in the first 2 rows, you have to pay more. So that means what? If you can afford to pay, you will get the service. So that means, you have become a client, you have become a customer. But that was not the case earlier. The state's responsible. So education is something which is being neglected by this state simply because we are, we are actually tending towards accepting governance as a model of conceptualizing public administration. And the third point, which is very important, as a result of that, what is happening? There are areas which will not pay back the state or which will not pay back the service provider. These are getting depleted. These are getting less importance from the service provider. So the state-led development is something which is being attacked down. I'm not saying that I am in favor of state-led development. Soviet Russia is a good example. But that's to me, that's an aberration. Those who would like to know more about it, the literary kind of expression of the Soviet system, please read George Orwell's Animal. So I'm not talking about that kind of state-led development system, but services to the people, which is the main motto of public administration, because it is meant to serve the public. Then I think what we're talking about, the governance will lose its conceptual validity, conceptual viability in course of time. So public participation, the main topic which you have asked me to talk about, public participation in governance, they do not go together. Because governance, ordinary sense, to me, governance is not at all an innocent concept. It is an ideologically charged concept. And if you accept that position, then I'm saying that your topic, public participation and governance, they don't go together. On the contrary, there is a contradiction between the two. Because governance does not insist on public participation. The governance is a pre-designed formula given to govern public participation. Public participation, is being disciplined. Public participation is being shaped by the model governance suggests. So public participation, again, is not possible without the instruction, without the methods, without the modes in which governance is articulated. So there is, I think, a contradiction. If you think of public administration, public participation in the sense of democratic participation, and governance in the sense of public administration, there is a serious contradiction. And I think we have to hit at that contradiction to understand the conspiratorial aspect of governance as it's being talked about nowadays to a great extent. Now, I'm going to conclude by referring to 3 important assumptions. I'm giving you food for thought, not thought of food, because I can't provide you food virtually. So I'm giving you food for thought. The first point, since you are, I'm not talking about my student, because she's already grouped in a particular mode of thinking. But you, the younger friends of mine who are very kind of innovative, who are ready to take the challenge, I'm just giving this food for thought for you. The first thing, let us raise 3 important questions. And on the basis of those questions, we'll be able to probably provide an alternative to governance. I'm not asking you to accept whatever I am saying. I'm not asking you to accept whatever is derivative. I'm asking you to think afresh so that you can give us new inputs to understand governance, quote unquote, in the new perspective. Because it's very difficult to get away from this, given the hegemony of the global capitalism. at this point of time. Global capitalism in terms of culture, global capitalism in terms of language, global capitalism in terms of our urge to go to the US or go to the West. Culturally, if you can speak good English, then you are very educated. I mean, you still believe in it in India. Now, in terms of language, if you speak better English, then you are most respected member of any fraternity. And if you get admitted to any of the Western schools or colleges, you feel great. You are on the top of the moon. So these are, I think, symbols of mental bankruptcy, which is being aggravated, which is being pampered by the concept of governance. So how to counter that? I don't misunderstand me. I'm not trying to politicize my talk. I'm simply trying to put certain questions so that you can see governance afresh from the academic point of view. That's my purpose, because I'm sure some of you will become good teachers, good researchers in future. The first question: can governance be structural? The first question: can governance be structural? Now, by that I mean that do you have a specific structure of governance, specific structure of articulating responses to public authority? I'll give you an example. Now, suppose when you come to a particular country, think of the constitution, we think of the constitution, we think of the language, we think of the culture, we think of the locational advantages, disadvantages. So if we take all of them into account, then do you think we'll have one definition of India? No, because our definition of India is multifaceted. It is multidimensional. So there is one very difficult to have one definition of India. Those who are, like my student Punjabi, they will think of India being very robust. But those who are Bengali, they think India are very, very mild. Those who are from Gujarat, they think of India differently from those who are from Assam. So if governance is a structural design, then it's very difficult to understand its functions, simply because a structure functions in its own way, regardless of the social, political, and economic situation. So if you link governance with the prevalent social, economic, and cultural circumstances, governance is not bound to be a structure. Governance will be multi-structure. Definitionally, governance will be multi-structural. That's the first question. Is governance a monostructural or is governance multi-structural? Question number one. Question number two: can governance be understood or be conceptualized irrespective of the circumstances? Can governance be conceptualized, be construed, be understood irrespective of the context? Here I am reiterating the question which I raised earlier in a different form. As I mentioned at the outset, governance is essentially a conspiratorial conceptual design by the World Bank, by the IMF, by the world capitalism. Now, if that be so, the model of governance which they provide may be meaningful with regard to their context. But the governance which they provide for us, the non-European countries, or non-American countries, or non-Western countries, cannot be the same, because we are different socially, culturally, politically, economically. So how can you say that the same size of shirt will fit in everybody? Those who are thin, they require one kind of size of shirt. Those who are little, plump, they will need a different kind of stuff. So governance as a structure has to be different. So can governance be understood without reference to the social, cultural, and political context of the day? That's the second question. Please probe into it. And third question, can governance be totally aloof? Can governance be totally aloof from the mindset that provides foundation to the structure of public authority? Can governance be totally aloof? Can governance be totally immune from the mindset that informs the public authority? Now, let me elaborate. What do I mean by that? Now, when you think of mindset, I think of social, economic, political, and ideological preferences of a particular group of people or particular country. So I have my ideological belief. Ideological belief does not necessarily mean support to a party. I believe that, India's ancient texts, Vedas, Upanishads, need to be studied. I also believe that the ideas of the so-called Hindu nationalists, starting from Dayanand Saraswati till Golwalkar, need to be studied. I also think that Hindutva needs to be studied, simply because, unless and until you understand these ideological packages, you cannot conceptualize, you cannot comprehend today's public governance. So the mindset is very important. Mindset means essentially conceptual parameters. There are some who are very religious. Gandhiji, as you know, one of the most religious persons we have ever seen. And Gandhiji used to do prayer every morning at 4 o'clock in the morning. And Gandhi said, I'm a Hindu because I believe in Upanishad and I don't eat beef. Now, same Gandhi did not insist on ban on cow slaughter. Why? Simply because he knew cow provides cheap protein to a particular section of Indian community. So if we stop that, then we are actually depriving them of the source of protein which was available at a cheaper rate. The tragedy of South Asia, that those who believed in religion, they did not use religion for the public purpose. And those who did not believe in religion, they used religion for public purposes. Example, Gandhiji. He was a religious-minded person, A to Z, from top to bottom. Ishwaro Allah tero naam sabko sammati de Bhagwan. Jinnah was not at all religious. He was an irreligious person. He used to drink, he used to smoke, he used to eat pork, he had white girlfriend. So these are all in Islam, these are all what is called crime. But this Jinnah used religion, two-nation theory. This Jinnah used two-nation theory, religion, to divide the country. While Gandhi never used religion, never. So that's it. So the mindset. That's why the neighboring countries of India, they all became free in the 40s. But except India, no country had sustained democracy. Pakistan is a democracy is in form, but in practice, it is controlled by military. Bangladesh, the same. Sri Lanka, Nepal, Hindu state. So, if you think of the South Asia, that's a tragedy of South Asia. With the mindset, we should have governed the South Asia after independence, despite having the same legacy, same British legacy, did not continue. We need to probe into it. Why it didn't continue? Aisha Jalal did some work on this, but I think we need to probe further why it happened in India, but it didn't happen in Pakistan, it didn't happen in Bangladesh, it didn't happen in Sri Lanka, it didn't happen in Nepal. So, it's a serious question, a serious conceptual question. So the last point, the third point which I'm talking about, the governance needs to be understood with the dominant mindset and also peripheral mindset also. At one point of time, Savarkar was considered to be an untouchable. I remember in our department, your teacher knows about it, that at one point of time, we wanted to study Savarkar, but there is a massive opposition. If you read Savarkar, it means you are a supporter of Hindutva. Nonsense. Recently I published a book on Hindu nationalism in India. I found that he tried to evolve an alternative. Now, because of Hindutva, you may not agree with that. I mean, Hindutva in practice today is not the Hindutva which Savarkar propounded. I'm telling you. Read Savarkar's Hindutva book. I'm not a Savarkarite. Don't misunderstand me. I'm a serious academic. And I read Savarkar in between lines. And I found out that today's Hindutwalas, they are distorting Savarkar to a significant extent. Had there been no 1940 Lahore resolution, had the Muslim League not put forward the Lahore resolution, probably Savarkar and Golwalkar would not have become so Hinduized. It's a historical conjecture, but it happened. So at that point of time, they were alternative voices. So their approach to public authority was governed the mindset. That's why they didn't like Gandhi, they didn't like Nehru, they didn't like the Congress leadership. Because Congress leadership was governed by the idea which was not linked with the people at large. So to me, if you want to understand today's governance, instead of looking at the World Bank report or instead of looking at my books, think afresh on the basis of these three questions. Then probably you will end up with something conclusive about the assumption which I made at the outset. Is governance a conceptual conspiracy or not? And finally, since I talked about Savarkar, I just would like to refer to one particular poem. I don't want to read the entire poem, but I remember some lines. They are very useful to understand today's mindset, the mindset of the sensible people. I'm not talking about the mad people. There are mad people. I'm talking about sensible people. Ram balo, Allah balo. Ram balo, Allah balo. अपने आप को मजहब से बचा लो, अपने आप को मजहब से बचा लो. मंदिर मस्जिद कभी फुर्सत में बना लेना, मंदिर मस्जिद कभी फुर्सत में बना लेना. अभी नफरत से टूटे हुए घर तो बना लो, अभी नफरत से टूटे हुए घर तो बना लो. Namaskar and thank you so much, sir.
So it indeed was a very insightful view into the topic, and the webinar was very fruitful for the students indeed. So from here, we move towards the question answer round, and the participants present in the meeting can jot down their questions on the chat box, and from there, I'll be taking them and you can ask the questions from sir. So we already have some questions. The first is from Umang Chaudhary. Umang, can you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Good evening, sir. My question is that the emergence of digital revolution has initiated e-governance as an integral part of government. What are your views regarding e-governance, and do you agree that e-governance has contributed to good governance?
The second question is from Arya. She asks, my question is that to what extent can we enhance the public participation through digital mechanism? I guess both the questions were interlinked. Then the third question is from Radhika. She asks, sir, what efforts broadly should be taken to transform governance to good governance? And the fourth question is from Mandavi Dikshit. Mandavi, could you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, Mandavi Dikshit side.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
So,
Okay,
sir,
go
my
on.
question is that good governance can have empowering effects when it enables societal actors to challenge oppression, corruption, or violations of human rights. But at the same time, there are debates about how much good the good governance should be. Because the concept of good governance largely projects the normative concepts of the West. So, in developing countries like India, where societies and cultures are not standardized, it is problematic to expect that standardized tools to have uniform and beneficial effects, regardless of local context. So, my question is that how can we understand the standardization of good governance in the age of reflexive modernity? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mandavi. The next question is from Yash. Yash, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, good evening, sir. So my question is, sir, do you agree with the statement that effectiveness of the government system at various levels and people's participation in the governance system are interdependent? What are your views regarding that?
I think I have got 5 questions. Let me answer. First of all, I have my reservation about digital governance. Now or e-governance. Nowadays we are talking about it at length. But tell me, how many of Indians have access to e-learning? One of the ingredients of e-governance. I head one of the rural universities, a very well-known university, one of the oldest, the oldest central university in the country, which was founded by great poet Rabindranath Tagore. And I remember we started e-class, and in our university, there are many first generation learners, and they come from very poor family. Most of their fathers are probably daily wage laborer. So for them to have a smartphone is a luxury. So in that case, the idea of digital or e-governance, probably those who belong to Delhi, you can afford to think in that line. But though I was in Delhi for almost 3 decades, but having spent so many years in India's rural areas, I find that this is also a conspiracy to divide people into 2 unbalanced segments. One who are well off, one who has access to all the facilities of the good governance model, and the majority of them will be deprived of that system of governance. So digital governance, e-governance, that is something which I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. And personally, I do not accept that this has anything to do with good governance, right? I know this particular approach, you think about it. I'm just provoking you to think differently. I'm not saying that, discard your belief, but I'm simply making an argument. And if you are persuaded by my argument, then I'm sure you'll think about it. That whether whatever I'm saying, does it contain any substance or not? So my response to you, Umang, that I'm trying to provoke you to think afresh. Because when you think of governance, it is not a system which is operative vis-a-vis KM College, for instance. or vis-a-vis Delhi University, for instance. We have got almost more than 1,000 universities in the country. And most of the universities or the center of learning are located in the periphery of the country. So if you think of those people who are in the periphery, then for them, I don't know whether e-governance or digital governance makes any sense. That's my response to you, Umang. The second, can we enhance digital governance? I think my answer is more or less in the same line of thinking. Yes, we can. Certainly you can, because those who are well off, those who have access to all kinds of financial securities, probably they can. I mean, you can think of a mobile phone with a good RAM, with what is called maximum memory, very expensive kind of stuff. But think of the Aam Janta. Think of the Aam Janta. If you want to raise the literacy level, even in today's India, 66% of our population are literate, means they can sign. Now they can just simply sign. So if you think of that 34%, we have no moral responsibility to them. I think that's little unfair, ideologically believe. My perspective as a student of political science, I think, as I said, we always operate in a political process. And that political, by that mean, I don't mean the mode of achieving power. Politics does not necessarily mean a mode of achieving power. Politics is essentially a power equation. And in everyday life, we operate in the power equation. Why did you listen to me? I mean, you've been listening to me for almost an hour. Why? Simply because, I have the power to make you listen. Why do you listen to your teacher? Because the teacher in that power equation, in that power relationship, is higher in terms of access to certain facilities which you would like to have during the class. So because of this power equation, the relationship is shaped. So digital governance is something which is exclusive to a particular section of the population. It can't be general. Because to have digital governance effective, you have to have certain facilities. I mean, internet, I lost, twice I lost connection with you. And I'm just doing this webinar from a university. So think of the situation, Vishwabharati's vice chancellor does not have internet access continuously. So think of somebody who is a first generation learner, whose father is a rickshaw puller, or whose father is a daily wage laborer. Now you may say, he doesn't have to be educated. Let him work in the field. That's a different question altogether. If you hold that opinion, then I have no argument with you, because you belong to a different ideological camp. But if you think, no, he needs to be studied as well, then your approach will be different. So I think I have my great reservation about digital governance, unless and until we expand our budgetary allocation for education, budgetary allocation for health, budgetary allocation for social security. Old age nowadays, initially because of the morality, we used to look after your old parents. But you must have heard the story in the newspaper that parents are just simply discarded because the kids, they go abroad, they settle there, and the parents suffer here. I know in this university, many Bengali elites, they came and settled here, and their kids are settled abroad. So when they die, there is no one for cremation. So, this is the situation. Now, if you believe that that's a life for me, that's a different ball game altogether, Umang and Yashaswi, or the question which was asked by me. Now, governance and good governance. Madam, I do not believe in this distinction. Governance is governance. There is nothing called bad governance. There is nothing called good governance. It is again, it is again an attempt to make a kind of distinction between countries which did not pay back to the IMF and World Bank. They were badly governed. I'm sure your teacher must have told you. If you read the 1989 World Bank report, one of the kind of sources of conceptualizing governance, which became good governance in 1992 World Bank report, was the failure of these sub-Saharan African countries, Tanzania, Uganda, Nigeria, Chad, their failure to pay back the loan. As a result, they were badly governed. So it means what? The capitalism. The capital is, if the capital is respected, you are good governed, you are part of good governance countries. If the capital is not paid back, you are badly governed. So good governance, bad governance, to me, that distinction makes no sense. But public administration, can you say it's good public administration, bad public administration? We never say that, because we don't talk about it. Public administration is public administration. Right? So I think, I'm not really, competent enough to answer this question, because I don't believe in it. Conceptually, to me, good governance, bad governance is nothing but a jugglery of words by the World Bank. Then governance, is it an empowering device? And I'm very happy that this friend of mine referred to the normative dimension of governance. I mean, that's the point I'm hitting at. That governance is not at all a mechanical device. Governance is based on normative considerations linked with the well-being of the people at large. So if you accept governance being a normative device, then it's certainly an empowering device. But the moment you use governance in the World Bank sense, then it ceases to be normative. It becomes a design, which is well-defined structurally. So your question is very good question, but if you link normative with governance, they don't go together. And I'm sure, being a student of public administration, you understand, or you accept the idea of governance not in the Western sense, but that's the conceptual roots. You cannot say that I don't know the conceptual roots of governance. Now, so if you believe that governance being normative in the Western sense, then I think you are misleading us. Your conceptual, understanding is little, what is called misdirectional, I would say. Because governance cannot be normative. Public administration is normative. So from that point of view, I think if you use the term public administration being a normative design of public authority, then is certainly empowering. So if you use governance in a very general sense, in a very generic sense, then yes, I agree that you use governance and public administration interchangeably, so I excuse you. But I'm sure a student of public administration knows that governance is essentially a product of the Western intervention. And from that angle, it cannot be a normative aspect. That's my answer. Secondly, effectiveness of governance. I would like to use, reformulate your question in terms of effectiveness of public authority. I am very particular about the public part. This, prefix public authority, public administration, public governance, that makes sense. Because governance is directed to ensure the well-being of the people at large, public. ये public का बात है भाई, public का बात. So when you think of the public in terms of a sum total of people, regardless of differences in terms of class, creed, color, or ethnicity, then yes, it is certainly people's participation is essentially an important dimension, an important kind of push or important yardstick for effective public authority. or to use governance in a generic sense, effective public governance. But as I mentioned at the beginning, that people's participation and governance, conceptually speaking, they do not go together. They are self-contradictory. It's contradiction in terms. If you think of people-centric administration, it has to be public administration, not governance. Okay, 5, then I can take more. Since
Okay,
we have
sir.
to go, say. Well, Anjali,
Yes,
yes,
sir.
please, go ahead, please go ahead.
Okay, sir. So the next question is from Dharmendra. Dharmendra, kindly unmute yourself and ask your question from sir.
Okay. Good evening, sir. Sir,
Thank you.
my question is that with the 73rd constitutional amendment, our government has enhanced the public participation in decision making, and it certainly led to good governance. Or after hearing you, rather, I would say that people-centric decision making. So my question is that can we say that through more decentralization of power, we can move towards larger public participation and ultimately people-centric government? Your comments on that. Thank you, sir.
Okay, okay. Then the next चलो धर्मेंद्र के बाद अंजलि और 2-4 क्वेश्चन लेते हैं.
जैसे वेस्टर्न कंट्रीज में होता है कि पॉलिसी मेकिंग में पब्लिक ओपिनियन, एक्सपर्ट लॉजिक एंड पॉलिटिकल विल होता है, जबकि हमारे यहाँ पॉलिसी मेकिंग में बहुत सी कमियां हैं. जिन 3 पॉइंट की मैं बात कर रहा हूँ, ज्यादातर पॉलिसी में इनमें से किस एक पॉइंट की बहुत अधिक कमी दिखती है, और इन वजहों से पॉलिसी का जो एक्सपेक्टेड रिजल्ट आना चाहिए वह नहीं दिखता. सर, आप इस कमी को कैसे देखते हैं और इसमें बदलाव को लेकर आपका क्या मानना है? And sir, the last question today we have is from Shashank Shekhar. Shashank, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure. Hello, sir.
Yes.
Through your discussion, we are mostly questioning the idea of governance as a mode of conceptualizing public administration, if I understood you right. Sir, the other modes of understanding public administration or going for public administration, which thought that it addressed public, do you think it actually addressed public at that time? Because most of them either failed or deviated from its path. The ideas of administration which we used before 1970s, when the idea of governance was not there, were they actually serving the idea of public? And secondly, if they are not serving the idea of public and we are questioning the idea of governance too, what alternative do we have to go for public administration?
Okay, so I'll start with धर्मेंद्र. धर्मेंद्र, मैं आपको एक सवाल पूछना चाहता हूँ. ये सवाल है, ये जो 73rd अमेंडमेंट एक्ट हुआ, आपने जो कहा था, ये कॉन्सेप्चुअली इन टर्म्स ऑफ द एक्ट रेवोल्यूशनरी, ये तो मैं मानता हूँ, क्योंकि अगर वो एक्ट पढ़ा जाए तो 33% रिजर्वेशन फॉर वीमेन, देन इलेक्शन होना चाहिए, इलेक्शन का जो खर्च होगा ऑडिट होना चाहिए, वगैरह वगैरह. एवरीथिंग इज वेरी पॉजिटिव. बट मेरे को बताओ, आई डोंट नो आप कहाँ से आए हुए, मेरे को बताओ हिंदुस्तान में ऐसा कोई परिवर्तन नजर आ रहा है आपको? धर्मेंद्र, मैं आपको पूछ रहा हूँ, क्योंकि आप तो पगड़ी पहन के आपको फोटोग्राफ दिया, तो लगता है आप दिल्ली से बाहर का ही हो.
Yes, sir. I am from Rajasthan and Rajasthan. Yes, sir. राजस्थान में अगर मतलब जैसे ग्राउंड लेवल पे देखें तो पंचायती राज एज ए फॉर्मल स्ट्रक्चर तो एस्टेब्लिश हुआ है, लेकिन जो एक्चुअल इम्प्लीमेंटेशन होना चाहिए उसमें कहीं ना कहीं आज भी लेकिंग है. जैसे आपने जिस प्रकार से अपने प्रेजेंटेशन में बताया कि वो गवर्नेंस वाला पार्ट ही रह गया, लाइक फॉर्मल स्ट्रक्चर है, लेकिन इनफॉर्मल लेवल पे पीपल के माइंड में हम आज भी पंचायती राज को उतना एस्टेब्लिश नहीं कर पाए हैं.
तो आपको तो मेरा सवाल का जवाब पता है भाई. आपके दिन मैंने क्यों क्वेश्चन किया, आपने तो मेरे से बहुत अच्छा जवाब दिया. मैं आपका थोड़ा ऐड करना चाहता हूँ. आप राजस्थान का होने वाला, ये जो आरटीआई एक्ट हुआ था ना 2005 में, ये आरटीआई का पीछे राजस्थान में एमके मजदूर किसान शक्ति संगठन, अब जहाँ अरुणा राय बंकर राय का जो कंट्रीब्यूशन इमेंस था, क्योंकि गांव वालों को कंट्रीब्यूशन है. बट उस हिसाब से अगर हिंदुस्तान को देखा जाए तो कंट्रीब्यूशन उतना नीचे तक अभी पहुंचा नहीं. आप सोच सकते, आप बताओ मेरे को धर्मेंद्र जी, ये एक मंदिर हमने बना दिया, उसमें हिंदुस्तान का जो हाल है उसका कोई चेंज होगा? आप बताओ। हमारा ये जो तेजस एयरक्राफ्ट हमने खरीदा, इसमें जो लोग खाना नहीं खा पा रहा है, खाना नहीं मिल रहा है, जो बिलो पॉवर्टी लाइन का जो इंसान है, उसका कोई उपकार हुआ?
डेफिनेटली नॉट सर।
तो इसीलिए मैं कह रहा हूँ, आप लोगों को मैं प्रोवोक कर रहा हूँ, क्योंकि आप लोग ऐसा एक जनरेशन का हो, बहुत चैलेंज आप लोगों को फेस करना पड़ेगा सामने। हमारा लाइफ तो लगभग पीसफुल था, मुझे पता था इस लाइन में चलो कुछ ना कुछ गुजारा आ जाएगा, लाइफ निकल जाएगा। लेकिन आप लोगों का ये चैलेंज आ रहा है, इसलिए सिंस यू आर स्टूडेंट ऑफ वेरी गुड कॉलेज, वहां पे आपको अच्छा से पढ़ाया गया। आई एम श्योर she, because she was trained by me, I am sure she must have provoked you to raise this kind of unpleasant question. ये क्वेश्चन अगर आप कोई ऐसा पार्लियामेंटेरियन के सामने बताओ, और पंचायत में जो सत्ता जिसका पास है उसको एक सवाल पूछो, वो तो गुस्सा करके आपको नुकसान पहुंचाएगा। तो ये जो माइंडसेट का बात मैंने बताया ना, ये माइंडसेट का बात बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है। एंड आई एम वेरी हैप्पी धर्मेंद्र, राजस्थान को होने के बावजूद भी आप इसका जो लिमिटेशन है ये आपको नजर आया। एंड यू आर यंग गाय, हमें धीरे धीरे आपको नजर और साफ और सच हो जाएगा। तो नजर जितना क्लियर होते जाएंगे तब आपको पता चलेगा कि ये जो गुड गवर्नेंस का जो प्रॉब्लम मैंने बताया था, ये प्रॉब्लम तब आप महसूस करोगे। आज तो सुना, आपने सुना किताब पढ़ के आपका थोड़ा आइडिया फॉर्मुलेट कर रहे हैं, लेकिन इन कोर्स ऑफ टाइम, जैसा जिस उम्र में मैं पहुंचा, अभी मेरे को इसके बारे में इतना डेफिनेट शब्द कहने के लिए हिम्मत आया, सिंपली बिकॉज आई हैव सीन द इन अ कंट्री। जो आप कह रहे हैं यही सही है, यही सही बात है। 73 अमेंडमेंट एक्ट तो हुआ, जैसे मैं आपको बता रहा हूँ बंगाल का क्या होता है। बंगाल, बिहार, उड़ीसा, असम, ईस्टर्न जोन का बात कर रहा हूँ। यहाँ पे जो होता है 33% वुमेन रिजर्वेशन तो हुआ, पंचायत में बहुत प्रधान औरत बनी, लेकिन औरत काम नहीं करता है, उसका पीछे जो उसका आदमी होता है, ही वर्क्स ऑन हर बिहाफ। ये कई जगह में देखा मैंने। तो ये जो पैट्रियार्की जब तक खत्म नहीं करोगे तब तक ये सब चलेगा। तो मैं हमारा जो, इसलिए मैं अंबेडकर को बहुत पसंद करता हूँ। अंबेडकर ऐसा एक इंसान था, ऐसा एक हमारा नेशनलिस्ट थे, जो कहा था, अंबेडकर एंड गुरुदेव रविंद्रनाथ टैगोर, ये दोनों लोग यही बात बार बार कहा, गांधी जी को भी कहा कि आप जो पॉलिटिकल फ्रीडम का बात कर रहे हो, इसका मतलब क्या है? इसका मतलब है, ठीक है, पॉलिटिकली अंग्रेज के बजाय हिंदुस्तान को शासन करेंगे, बट हिंदुस्तान का जो प्रॉब्लम है, जो कास्ट डिविजन, धर्म लेके जो विभाजन, ये आप कैसे दूर करोगे? ये जब तक दूर नहीं होगा तब तक फ्रीडम का मतलब ही है कि कई लोग फ्रीडम एंजॉय करेंगे एट द कॉस्ट ऑफ द मेजॉरिटी। तो जितना आइन आप बनाओ कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ेगा ज्यादा लोगों का, क्योंकि हमारा माइंडसेट बहुत कंजर्वेटिव है। तो इसीलिए मैं बता रहा हूँ, जब मैं 84-85 में यूपी में गए थे, यूपी का बरेली से एक रिमोट गांव में, तो वहां पे मैं एक डेवलपमेंट का कुछ प्रोजेक्ट कर रहा था। तो एक बुजुर्ग इंसान चारपाई में बैठा था, उसके पास गए, हमने कहा, हम तब यंग थे, उम्र तो कम ही था, आप सोच सकते हैं, मैं तो अभी बूढ़ा हो गया। तो मैंने कहा, बाबा जी बताओ ये डेवलपमेंट का क्या है? तो कह रहे, आप क्यों कर रहे हैं ये, अब शहर वाला लोग। देखिए, हिंदुस्तान का दुख किस बात के जानते हैं? गांधी बाबा आए, गांधी बाबा चले गए, हिंदुस्तान का सुधार नहीं हुआ। तो मैं यही कह रहा हूँ, ये जो हिंदुस्तान सुधार करने के लिए जो ये सोच शुरू हुआ, जैसे इसीलिए आपने तो ये सवाल भी पूछा, जवाब भी आपने दिया, ये सोच शुरू हुआ। इसलिए आई एम वेरी पॉजिटिव दैट इन कोर्स ऑफ टाइम, प्रॉब्लम हम नहीं देख पाएंगे, इट विल टेक टाइम टू चेंज ए सोसाइटी। हमारा हिंदुस्तान का डेमोक्रेसी ओनली 75 years old, अभी तो छोटा सा, मतलब इसे वेरी ब्रीफ हिस्ट्री। अमेरिका में इतना साल बाद 1965 में ब्लैक अफ्रीकन अमेरिकन को वोटिंग राइट्स दिया गया। तो कब इंडिपेंडेंस हुआ? 1787 में। तो इतना सालों बाद फर्स्ट टाइम डेमोक्रेटिक जो बात करते हैं, डिमोस का रूल, यूनिवर्सल एडल्ट सफरेज हुआ 1965 में। तो इसलिए ये एक देश के इतिहास के लिए 75 इयर्स कुछ है ही नहीं, अभी बचपना है, ये ठीक से खड़ा नहीं हो पाता। इसलिए लेकिन सोच शुरू हो गया, जैसे आपका सवाल में उसका एविडेंस है, जब आप सोचना शुरू कर दिया। ये जो 73rd अमेंडमेंट एक्ट हुआ, ठीक है, पॉलिसी के हिसाब से इज वेरी पॉजिटिव, वेरी प्रोग्रेसिव, बट इन टर्म्स ऑफ प्रैक्टिस इसका कितना कामयाब हो पाएंगे आम जनता, इसके बारे में जो डाउट आपने दिखाया था, यही होगा हमारा देश के लिए आगे बढ़ने का एक सीढ़ी। ठीक है, दैट्स वन। सेकेंडली, पॉलिसी मेकिंग डेफिशिएंसी के बारे में एक सवाल उठाया हमारा दोस्त। देखिए, मैं तो इसके बारे में जवाब देना चाहता हूँ एक सेंटेंस में। अगर ये डेफिशिएंसी आप खत्म करना चाहते हो, इफ यू वांट टू गेट रिड ऑफ दिस डेफिशिएंसी, देयर इज ओनली वन वे आउट, यू नीड टू मेक मी द प्राइम मिनिस्टर ऑफ द कंट्री। आप तैयार हो इसके लिए तो हम कुछ कर सकते हैं। बट एनीवे, दैट्स द लाइटर पार्ट। द सीरियस पार्ट इज दैट, जैसा मैंने पहले बताया धर्मेंद्र का, while responding to Dharmendra's question, that you know policy deficiency होगा, क्योंकि मैंने जो कहा ना, सबसे बड़ी what is most important in any system, whether in college or in school or in university or in the country, the most critical part happens to be the mindset. I am sure you can tell me, I know from my experience, there are some teachers who are sought after by the students, and there are some teachers, आप लोग कहते हो वो खरूस बंदर फिर आ गए। इसका मतलब क्या है? For some, teaching is just a profession। भाई हम जाएंगे, क्या पढ़ाए कुछ फर्क नहीं पड़ेगा। आप लोग तो सवाल दिल्ली में फिर भी उठाते हो, कभी विश्व भारती आ जाओ, कभी कोई गांव का कॉलेज में चले जाओ, एंड वहां पे जस्ट अंदर बैठ के देखो टीचर क्या पढ़ाते हैं। टीचर अगर 2+2 3 भी कहे, बच्चों सवाल नहीं उठाते हैं। एक माइंडसेट का बात है। तो टीचर का जिम्मेदारी बहुत होता है। टीचर इज द समवन हु प्रिपेयर्स द यंग माइंड्स। यंग माइंड से मिट्टी का ताल होता है, आप लोग जैसा है। ये मिट्टी का ताल को आप कैसे बनाओगे? आप फ्रैंकेनस्टाइन बनाओगे ना एक दुर्गा प्रतिमा बनाओगे? ये जो फर्क आपको तैयार करना पड़ेगा। इफ यू आर सीरियस दैट आई डोंट वांट टू मेक ए फ्रैंकेनस्टाइन, आई वुड लाइक टू मेक ए वेरी ब्यूटीफुल आइडल, देन आपका अप्रोच डिफरेंट होगा। और ये अप्रोच डिफरेंट कैसे होगा? ये फोर्सिबली नहीं किया जाता है। आई एम श्योर द प्रिंसिपल मैडम सेज एवरीबॉडी क्लास लेना चाहिए। I as vice chancellor tell all my colleagues class लेना चाहिए, रिसर्च करना चाहिए, but how many of us do it? We don't. तो इसलिए जो आपने बताया ना पॉलिसी मेकिंग डेफिशिएंसी, ये ऐसा एक सीरियस चैलेंज है, जो चैलेंज ना 1-2 बंदा से मुश्किल है। इट टेक्स हिस्टोरिकल पीरियड। मैंने बताया तो अमेरिका इतना बड़ा कंट्री, हमने कहते हैं ओल्डेस्ट डेमोक्रेसी, बट अमेरिका में 1965 तक एडल्ट सफरेज ही नहीं था। 13% जो अफ्रीकन अमेरिकन है अमेरिका में, दे डिडंट हैव वोटिंग राइट्स। तो इसीलिए मैं ये जो सोच की बात कर रहा हूं, 200 साल हो गया, फिर भी देखो अमेरिका में 1965 तक एडल्ट सफरेज था ही नहीं। और हम कहते हैं ओल्डेस्ट डेमोक्रेसी, लिबर्टी, इक्वालिटी, फ्रेटर्निटी की बात करते हैं। थॉमस जेफरसन कहते हैं ऑल मेन आर बोर्न इक्वल। अब्राहम लिंकन कहते हैं डेमोक्रेसी बाय पीपल, फॉर पीपल, ऑफ पीपल। तो वही कंट्री में ये डिस्क्रिमिनेशन था। तो हाउ यू रिजॉल्व दैट प्रॉब्लम इन ए कंट्री व्हिच हैज जस्ट 75 इयर्स ऑफ हिस्ट्री? तो इसका कोई देखो, अलादीन का चिराग मेरे पास नहीं है, किसी के पास नहीं है, फॉर दैट मैटर अलादीन का चिराग किसी के पास नहीं है, बट सोच है। आई एम वेरी हैप्पी जो आप लोग कम से कम इस तरह सोच रहे हैं, ये इसको कैसे एड्रेस किया जाए। ये सोच में ही ना there are roots for the development of this country, for the development of the humanity, the human content of this country. And thirdly, ये जो पब्लिक अल्टरनेटिव मोड, इसके तो हमने बताया, आरटीआई के बारे में बताया था ना, ये क्वेश्चन जवाब तो दिया मैंने आरटीआई इत्यादि बारे में। तो देखो whenever you think of governance, we are thinking in terms of structure. Structure तो जरूरी है. I'm not saying that without structure you cannot think of. जैसे अभी देखो, अभी I am speaking to you. There is a structure. अंजलि बताया 5:40 तक हम सवाल लेंगे, क्वेश्चन लेंगे, उसके बाद हम नहीं लेंगे. उसका मतलब इस स्ट्रक्चर which is applicable to you and also to me. ये आपको 40 मतलब मैक्सिमम 6 बजे तक हम सुन सकते हैं, उसके बाद हम नहीं सुन सकते हैं. So structure जरूरी है, but at the same time a conductor is also जरूरी. गाड़ी चलाने में गाड़ी रहने से काम नहीं चलेगा, एक ड्राइवर भी चाहिए. तो अगर अंजलि ये बात मेरे को ना बताएं तो स्ट्रक्चर नहीं रहेगा. मैं चलता रहूंगा, आप भी सुनते रहेंगे और कहेंगे भाई खरूस कब बंद करेंगे अपना बात. तो मतलब स्ट्रक्चर का बात कर रहे हो. तो ये पब्लिक पॉलिसी बीइंग द फोकस, ये जो जब तक ये स्ट्रक्चर का साथ माइंडसेट का आप डायलेक्टिकली लिंक नहीं करोगे, डायरेक्टली लिंक करना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि माइंडसेट चेंज होता रहता है, स्ट्रक्चर भी चेंज होता रहता है. लेकिन दोनों का सब जब तालमेल ना बैठेगा तब तक ठीक ठाक पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन विल नॉट फंक्शन इन टर्म्स ऑफ व्हाट इट शुड डू. तो इसीलिए पॉलिसी पब्लिक फोकस जो बता रहे थे, जैसे आजकल देखो इलेक्शन से पहले एक नया तरीका आ गया, आपने देखा होगा जरूर. मैंने आई डोंट वांट टू टेक नेम ऑफ एनी पॉलिटिकल पार्टी, जो सत्ता में है ये लोग बहुत कुछ योजना, बहुत कुछ परिकल्पना, बहुत कुछ डेवलपमेंटल प्लान्स वगैरह इनॉग्रेट करते हैं. ऐसा पहले भी हुआ था, आप पता करो, उसमें 80% हुआ ही नहीं अभी तक, लेकिन इनॉग्रेशन हो जाता है हर टाइम में. और हिंदुस्तान ऐसा एक कंट्री है जहां पे हर साल कम से कम 2-3 इलेक्शन होता है, और 2-3 इलेक्शन में लोगों में पता नहीं पब्लिक मेमोरी इतना पोर होता है कि आज कहा आपको, जैसे बंगाल में मैं देख रहा हूं ममता बनर्जी इज गिविंग एवरी डे, ठीक है, लेकिन पैसा कहां से आएगा नोबडी नोस, एंड धीरे धीरे बंद भी होता जा रहा है. इलेक्शन से पहले बहुत कार्यक्रम था, ये करेंगे वो करेंगे, धीरे 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 कम होते जा रहा है, क्योंकि इलेक्शन में जीत गया ना, इलेक्शन में जीत गया, अब इलेक्शन से पहले फिर नया कार्यक्रम आ जाएगा. तो जब तक ये माइंडसेट चलेगा तब तक कैसे आप पब्लिक फोकस में आएंगे बोलो. तो आप ही लोग हो, जैसे मैं कहता जो सोच में बदल आना चाहिए. अगर सोच में बदल आ जाए, उमंग, अंजलि, यशस्वी और जो सुन रहे हैं सबको मैं यही कह रहा हूं, सोच में बदल आ जाए तो हिंदुस्तान का तरक्की नहीं. मैं हिंदुस्तान के बारे में मैं सोचता नहीं, मैं सोचता हूं इंसानियत के बारे में, इंसानियत के बारे में. मैं इसीलिए मैं आपको एक अच्छा सा शेर सुनाना चाहता हूं, जो मेरा बहुत प्यारा सा शेर है. उसमें आपको बताओ, ये इंसानियत का सबसे सिंगल मोस्ट कैजुअलिटी है हर जगह में. इंसानियत नहीं है आजकल. सब लोग चाहते हैं कैसा आपको पीछे धकेल के मैं आगे बढ़ जाऊं. तो ये जो हिंदू मुसलमान का जो समस्या चल रहा है आजकल, आपने देखा होगा, मेजोरिटी माइनॉरिटी बहुत कुछ चल रहा है, सिटीजनशिप, नॉन सिटीजनशिप, कस्टमर, गवर्नेंस, पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन. इसका पीछे एक माइंडसेट का बहुत रोल है. माइंडसेट मतलब मैं कहता हूं सोशल, आइडियोलॉजिकल, पॉलिटिकल प्रेफरेंसेस, इसको मैं माइंडसेट कहता हूं. जब मंदिर में पुजारी को रहीम नजर आएगा, जब मस्जिद में मुल्ला को राम नजर आएगा, दुनिया का सूरत बदल जाएगी. जब इंसान में इंसान को इंसान नजर आएगा, जब इंसान को इंसान में इंसान नजर आएगा. That is the fundamental point of everything. Whether you talk of public administration, governance, anything. इंसान को as इंसान देखो बहुत समस्या का हाल हो जाएगा. That's my last statement. Thank you very much and stay safe.
Thank you so much, sir, for such a great discussion and webinar with the beautiful thoughts. और last की शायरी आपकी, I think this was one of the most engaging webinars that La Polity held. And Now I take this opportunity to invite Dr. Shyam Kumar, the teacher in charge of Law Polity, Department of Political Science, to please deliver the vote of thanks.
Good evening, sir. And Matt, I thought to speak something, but I just forget. But now,
घबरा गया होगा.
definitely, I remember your old. I was your student. I tell almost 2 decades back. I was a sir student, and sir taught me.
देखो 2 decades क्यों कहा भाई? आप कह रहे हैं मैं इतना बूढ़ा हो गया? इतना बूढ़ा मैं नहीं हुआ.
Definitely, sir. So, sir, बिल्कुल. First of all, in fact, I could not speak in the beginning, so I welcome you, sir, and I thank you for such a enlightening and such a thought-provoking lecture. And I certainly did not know that you are teaching political science by such a good Sairi, sir. So this is also a new thing for me. So I hope I will also be able to implement such thing in my class to teach my students, our students in the college. And in fact, I was attending entire program since beginning, and I was like listening everything. So, sir, I thought that I was, again, I would like to say, sir, I was just, it was a nostalgia, I tell you, sir, very frankly. And I become also too young. Now I'm also growing old now. But, I was 22 years back, it seems that I was there. You have been, sir, my guru. You trained me at every level. You supported me at every level. So I also take this opportunity to extend my gratitude and high respect for you. And I tell you very frankly, sir, whatever I am today and doing whatever little positive in wherever, whether in my college or whether in university or in society, to make it perfect and fine, in progressive directions, that, sir, it is your training, sir. So I just extend my wholeheartedly gratitude and thanks for you, sir. And I have a high esteem and high regard for you, sir. And who are attending this program, the sir has just spoken one very much important point, students, and which I have noted down, that सोच से बदलाव होगा. ये बहुत बड़ी बात है, और आपको समझना, हम सबको समझना, you are a future of this nation, and आपको संभालना है कल सब कुछ. So the important point is that whatever degree we have, whatever post position we have, unless or until we do not use that thing in the making the things progressive and inclusive, it is absolutely meaningless. So, sir, really you have taught very great, and in fact I would like to also in near future to have more in such lectures, sir. And another point which I would like to, I learned, frankly speaking, sir, I learned just now that you have taught in such a light manner by giving examples. आपने बिल्कुल सर हिंदी में भी बताया, आप छोटी मोटी घटनाओं को बताया, आपने बड़े लाइटर पार्ट में भी आपने किया. तो सर ये हमारी ट्रेनिंग भी है, मतलब सेमिनार शायद इसलिए भी होता है कि मैं भी तकरीबन 2 दशक से अधिक समय से पढ़ा रहा हूँ और सेमिनार में सीखता हूँ. और आप अभी कुछ पिछले साल आए भी थे कॉलेज में, सर, उस प्रोग्राम में भी मैं था. तो सर आपका जहाँ कार्यक्रम होता है, मेरी कोशिश होती है कि मैं भी दस्तक दे सकूं. देखिए, एक जो आपसे लगाव है, मतलब उसमें भी हाजिरी लगाने का एक मौका मिलता है. तो सर आप मेरे लिए टीचर नहीं रहे, मेरे गार्जियन भी रहे हैं. ये बात को मैं बड़ा पब्लिकली कन्विक्शन के साथ स्वीकार करता हूं, और आपका ब्लेसिंग मेरे पर है, ऐसा मैं मानता हूं, सर. और
ब्लेसिंग तो देने के लिए क्षमता मेरा नहीं है. ब्लेसिंग के लिए मैं भगवान से प्रार्थना करूंगा कि शाम को तरक्की दे, शाम को आगे बढ़ाए.
सर बिल्कुल धन्यवाद सर इसके लिए. एंड मुलाकात आपसे जल्दी हो, ऐसी हमारी तमन्ना है, सर. और आप दिल्ली आए तो सर हमें जानकारी जैसे होगी हम मिलना चाहेंगे, सर. और जी सर. एंड आई वुड लाइक टू थैंक यू टू एडवाइजर to law politic Dr. Rupinder Oberoi, who is my colleague, who is my friend, and you are doing such a great work. I really appreciate you. That last in couple of years since when you have become the in charge of this law politic, convener of law politic, I really appreciate you. In fact, I was, sir, very frankly speaking to you, in the last couple of months I was busy myself in some of my political and social so I could not even give sufficient time to the department for such thing. But she was handling, and she was also becoming the new ideas. and she is really making what is our department is known for decades. So I appreciate Dr. Rupinder Oberoi for such a great work for the department, for our college. So I take this opportunity, I really tell you, and accept it. And last but not the least, my young students, young minds, sometime I call them. Students, I tell you very frankly, I am extremely happy the way you people have been active, organizing, supporting the department. And in fact, when you organize everything, it is such a sense of happiness for me, I tell you, because I find you such a future leader of this nation, I tell you. This is what I think. So this is what I want to become. But whenever you become a leader, I always hope what sir has taught us, rational human being. You add some beauty to the society, not for certain post power positions. That does not make great. Gandhi had no position. Ambedkar hardly worked for any position, but he's known for. He's remembered every day. So my dear students, thank you so much. And you giving me this opportunity to extend vote of thanks that I definitely feel myself such a honor for me. Otherwise, I thought that I could not meet sir today, and that so thank you, my dear students. So thank you, sir. Sir, pranam. आपका आशीर्वाद बना रहे हम लोग पर. जल्दी मुलाकात होगी सर.
Thank you so much, sir. So finally, we have Umang with us to give the final vote of thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
A graceful and cheerful evening to our most valued guest and everybody present in the meeting. I, on behalf of La Polity, Department of Political Science, Kirodimal College, University of Delhi, extend my most sincere and hearty vote of thanks to Professor Bidyu Chakrabarty, who spared time from his busy schedule to grace the event and enlightening us with his words of wisdom. We as students always read your books and look forward to interact with you, and it is such an honor to interact with you in a fun and light way today. Thank you, sir, for turning our dreams into reality. Further, I would like to thank Dr. Shyam Kumar, teacher in charge La Polity, Dr. Rupinder Oberoi, staff advisor La Polity, and all the council members for their eminent efforts in making the event possible. I also thank all the participants who joined us today.